everyone for joining us with this adventure or this segment. This was something that we kind of talked about as a team doing because we were sitting around basically the shop and sharing stories.
We already kind of do that behind the counter quite frequently, whether it's because a customer had already asked about a god or a deity or something they were interested in. We happen to know enough about it to have this little story time, but we kind of already do that on a day-to-day basis, and it's fun to be able to do that officially.
Right.
Yeah.
So a member of the team had an idea about setting up Tales from the Hearth, since we have this beautiful studio that we built kind of during the pandemic, you know, to provide some virtual content and virtual sessions with our clients who are all over the world, and make it a little bit more intimate. Bring in different team members, you know, to have conversations. The first one I did from my own house, you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we had that snowstorm, and I did a quick session about like how I got introduced to my patron goddess, Diana.
Okay, yeah, I think I remember that. Yeah.
So for those of you who are joining us and you've never really seen us face to face, my name is Mamba MiRah. I'm the owner of Hearth Wisdom Store, and this lovely creature next to me is Piper. She's a member of our team, and we got to chatting about the work that you do with one of your deities.
Yeah.
And I thought that that would be a great segment to have for this type of a discussion. And so who are we going to talk about?
We're talking about Dionysus, which I am incredibly thrilled about talking about him because he is one that I think is very underrated in the Pantheon. And I mean, we'll kind of slowly get into the reasons why, but he's not even considered sometimes within the big 12, right? So we've all known like the 12 Olympians, but he's kind of interchanged between him and Hestia. They kind of switch seats a lot. So I think he deserves a little time for himself. We get to be with him and then talk about him, which I'm sure he's going to love. But also it's fitting because at the end of March is really a lot of where his celebrations are, primarily end of March, early April. This is the perfect time to kind of give worship to him, just kind of like a nice little devoted conversation.
Excellent. So I brought some wine for the occasion.
Of course.
And it's like this massive bottle. This was a gift that was given to me in November, and the nice thing about this one is it's actually like a low alcohol, so we're not gonna do drunken story time or
drunk histories
here.
For later.
Yes, that's for later. But it is a semi-sweet red wine, and I love the bottle. It's great. So I'm going to go ahead and pour us a little bit.
Wonderful.
You have this beautiful altar set up here. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what's on the altar?
Yes. Okay, so we've picked up a few pieces also within the store. We've got an astrophyllite tower right here, a Lepidolite tower as well. Both stones are very fitting for him. I've also got some tarot decks that I work with him specifically.
I see you also have an offering of wine here to Dionysus.
I do. I think he needs to drink with us, have a little, get comfortable just as we will. And then we've also got one of our deity candles made by Indigo Dreams Apothecary. I am in love with that candle. It was actually the first candle that I used for him on my altar at home. So it's very sentimental to me. He also loves it a little too much. Sometimes it's a fire hazard. And then I've also got an herbal blend here that we've made now in the store that has hibiscus, a couple of lavender pieces, eucalyptus and clove. I believe as well the essential oil that is in it is patchouli and...
It smells amazing.
And cinnamon, I think. So it's very earthy. And I've also got the pendulum that I usually work with him with, which is a tree agate. Got that here. Wow, go figure. But yeah, these two tarot decks are actually some of my favorite. It's the Deviant Moon Tarot, and then I don't know how to pronounce the other one. It's Tarot Nuage.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a very, like, both of them are very circus-like. I guess debauchery, like, you know, it's got that energy to it. However, he's very very particular with the deviant moon.
So let's talk a little bit about the history of Dionysus.
Yes.
Not everyone is familiar with all of the pantheons
Mhm.
or different traditions or whatnot.
Right.
So give us a little bit of backstory about Dionysus.
So
And first, before you do that, cheers.
oh yes, of course.
Mm. That's very tasty. It's very fitting.
Very sweet. I like that.
Okay.
That's wonderful.
So tell us about Dionysus.
So I think that there's a lot to be said over record keeping within Greece. It was just varied. I mean, there was times where Greece was split apart and then reconnected, split apart and then merged again. And between all of these renditions, they obviously started creating their pantheon. They started documenting their pantheon. But in some instances, some gods kind of got filtered through and picked apart. Dionysus was one of them. And I mean, we're going to kind of go through each. There's kind of three main eras for him, which can kind of be the reason we sometimes associate him with Pan, which I really wanted to talk about because he is very commonly misplaced with Pan. It's not a bad thing because I do believe that there's a lot of those connections, but mainly we've got the Mycenaean era of Dionysus, which is a very, very old, probably, I mean, Dionysus will probably predate that as well, but it predates an Orphic tradition of Dionysus and then also our Hellenistic Dionysus, which is the one that we know now. The Mycenaean one was a very old, weathered, but also very animalistic god. I think as well his name in the tablets was Dionyso rather than Dionysus. Mm-hmm. But he in that era was actually a son of Zeus and Persephone. And instead of going by Dionysus, he actually went by Zagreus. And so Zagreus, if anybody plays Hades, the indie game, they'd probably know. They did end up making a joke about that in the game, which I thought was entertaining. But Zagreus is not very prominent in our Hellenistic era. Mm-hmm. There's very little known, very little documentation about him, but he was initially Dionysus. And so Zagreus was a son of the underworld, but because it was a Zeus child, and Hera, of course, was very upset by that, she told the Titans to kill this baby because it was out of wedlock, another bastard child by Zeus, right? And the Titans tore him apart, and they ate him, and the only thing left was Dionysus's heart. And Athena actually saved it and took it and put it into a woman called Semele. She was immortal, and Zeus killed the Titans. Dionysus was born instead of being called Zagreus. He was now Dionysus, kind of reborn, that rebirth. And Zeus, killed the Titans with a lightning strike, and in their ashes formed the first humans, which is how the Mycenaean era described humanity being born, through this very hectic birth of Dionysus, even though he was born twice. And this kind of theme of rebirth is very common between each iteration, because it's not the only one, obviously. There's also an Orphic legend, and the Orphic era was stories from Orpheus himself. So it was this connection, also like the Mycenaean era, to the underworld, which Dionysus has a lot of, even though we've lost that connection over time. In the Orphic tradition, Dionysus was just a son of a mortal woman and Zeus. They translate a little bit better, but Orphic Dionysus actually also had horns, because the Mycenaean had also horns as well, and kind of fur, and had more of a animal feel to him, kind of like Pan, as we can see. So there's a diversion here. The Orphic one was similar to where there was this sense of rebirth. He died because Hera told the Titans to kill him. They tore him apart, and within there he was reborn. In some stories, it's because of Rhea, and in some stories, it's because of Zeus. Obviously, in predated eras, it's because of Athena. But regardless, that kind of essence of rebirth is still pretty traditional. Just by the time that we got to the Hellenistic Dionysus, it lost a lot of its depth because Orphic tradition had more of a sense of wanting to know what life and death and rebirth looked like. And so they had this way of explaining it through Dionysus himself. So he was very dark in his older iterations. He was a very rugged god. He didn't have a lot of connections with this joyous, very youthful frat boy that we've got now. He was a very older, more mature deity. And then over time, he became more of a youthful, very, very excitable deity. One that kind of lost a lot of his luster, a lot of his depth over time, which I think is interesting because it's kind of the opposite for other deities I found. Like, you go through these periods of time and these deities become more than what they used to be, whereas Dionysus almost went backwards.
Well, is that because it's not necessarily because he went backwards, but perhaps how we as humans kind of worked with him or viewed him, because that kind of gets into the discussion that you and I had, you had started sharing with me about, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you integrate him into your practice.
Yes.
But I was very curious about how you work with Dionysus from a kind of a shadow work standpoint on the first, because my first thought was like, oh my, really? How much wine is involved in your shadow work, Piper?
Oh, several classes.
But I mean, that's also, we wanted to play homage to the fun side of it. So I don't always dress like this. Piper doesn't always dress like this. We decided we wanted to get dressed up for the evening for the discussion.
Yes.
And I had a really fun time earlier kind of exploring, myself through the expression of clothing and vintage pinup. And I had a photo shoot. Shout out to Dynamite Dames earlier today. So they're the ones who put together this look. But a lot of people have this assumption that Dionysus is this frat boy, drunken, rowdy party kind of energy, the life of the party.
Right.
But there's a lot of history about his journey. I love the idea of the rebirth of your persona.
Yeah.
And the different life cycles that you can have, because we would all like to think that we evolve from our younger version selves too, which I think is what a lot of people associate him with, that we evolve into an older sessions. But you have, like, you say that his journey was almost reversed.
Yeah, he's got kind of that opposite, almost Benjamin Button style.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Exactly.
He's aging in back.
Yes.
Reverse there. Okay. So tell us about how you work with Dionysus in that shadow space, or in that like rebirth and whatnot.
Well, so I took a lot of inspiration from his very Orphic kind of characterization, mostly because I like that within my practice, as I'm working inwards, because his story is also the birth of like these first humans, it feels like I'm very reconnected with places in me that I didn't really know about, in that very philosophical way of getting root deep and into this essence of where I was created from, And he kind of has that feel to him when you do start working with him on a very, like a more mature level, rather than, I'm throwing a party and I want Dionysus to be here. That more intimate way of working with him has a very masculine but also feminine way of reconnecting you with a very authentic part of yourself. Because even in some stories of his, he actually he's had a couple of different people raise him. In one instance, it's Persephone, right? In another, it's Rhea. In another, it's Hermes. And then in another, it's actually a king and queen who raise him as a daughter. And he has this double life kind of going on, that I think a lot of people who deal with like dysphoria with themselves, he's also reconnected them with that, of just kind of understanding understanding that struggle, understanding that very real feeling of just not being in your right self or who your true self is, and reconnecting yourself with who you want to be. I did not know that I was going to practice with him. That was for sure. He kind of just showed up.
That's how they all usually just kind of show up. And
they usually do. They just kind of they pop in. I think though that he definitely was already there with me for a couple years before I really noticed him. In that way of I was kind of praying to him without realizing, if that makes sense. I'd be at parties and I'd get really anxious and I'd feel kind of just out of my body. I didn't want to be there. I'd go to the bathroom, kind of like have a little panic for a moment. And I often kind of do this thing when I'm alone in those instances of being very like worked up. I have a very open conversation with whoever will answer, you know, in those instances that we kind of tend to get to where we don't know who is around, but we want something to be there. And I was just kind of asking for just a little help. Like I just needed to get over this hurdle, and I needed my anxiety to go down, and I wanted to enjoy myself at this party because I was invited, and like I didn't want to make a big scene, and I felt like a hassle, and I just was worrying so much, but I just kind of opened myself up to like, whoever's there, please. I don't want to be ridiculous. And I'd step out of that bathroom and it almost felt like I was stepping out with kind of a hand on my shoulder. Yeah. But at that time, I didn't really know what that was, you know, like I didn't know who it was. I knew that it was a very different energy than the deities that I also work with now. But kind of over time, when I'd gotten to I slipped up a little as far as like my mental health, and I was growing a little anxious over that. And, you know, mental health and emotional health are not linear, which I've learned. And I was going down this rocky road again, and I was really worried about it because I wanted to feel like I was better again. And he just kind of showed himself a little bit more prominently than usual, which was these very small instances, especially at the store, where somebody would come in and they'd actually ask about him. We had a few customers that asked about starting a Dionysus candle, and without even thinking, I was like, you'll need this, this, and this. And I was like, don't ask why. I have no idea. I don't know why this information feels right, but it feels right, and I think he'd very much enjoy it. Or instances where actually the Grape Agate that I've got on my necklace,
now, yeah.
Yes, that was in the store, and I was so drawn to it. It was ridiculous. And I don't typically like Grape Agate. I think that it's just very small and bulbous, and it's weird to me. But I saw this one pendant, and I was like, that is the perfect cluster of grapes that I've ever seen. I want that so bad, and I don't know why. And slowly but surely, I'd even go home, and like the folks I stayed with, they would be drinking wine, and I'd be like, ooh, I kind of want a glass. Like, oh gosh, like yeah. I want to be a part of that, and I hate wine usually. And so I was like, what is all of these connections, and what do they mean? And like, I came back to the store, and I actually got, you know, a Dionysus candle, and I went home and I lit the candle for the first time, and I just let him be present in my space. And I was like, I don't know if you're really what I'm kind of being guided to or not, but I would like to discuss with you if that is what you're wanting. And I had to open my eyes because the candle was just going insane. And I was like, oh wow, oh no, oh, there's another deity here. I was like, oh goodness.
So what's really interesting about all of that is because while you were speaking, I got a lot of images of like the grapevine and the grapes and the vines that they grow on. And one of the first things that I thought I kind of saw image-wise kind of coming to the forefront was first and foremost, it takes a long time to actually grow grapes, you know?
Yes,
and so
it does.
The idea of like Dionysus' story is old before you see the grapes, you know?
Right.
So like the roots and the gnarliness of the roots and the vines had to grow first, and they had to kind of grow into the proper like placement to be able to reach the sun,
Yeah.
you know, or to be able to be shined on and whatnot and receive the nutrients before it can actually produce grapes or usable grapes or any kind of, you know, beneficial grapes.
Right.
And that's a really long process.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a tendency to see grapes and celebrate grapes and think like, oh, those are amazing, and not realize
Right.
how much work went into actually producing just one bunch of grapes.
Exactly.
You know? The other thing that I also kind of picked up on is when you were talking about being at the party, and it's almost like a level of like insecurity.
Yeah.
Like I want to have fun, but I also want to be seen. I also want to feel like secure in myself.
Yeah.
You know, and self-confident. And I wonder if, you know, in all of the perhaps hype and excitement around Dionysus, we've overassumed that that he just presents confidence. He just presents, you know, the extrovert energy,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and not realize that perhaps that was all a journey to get to. And so it's almost like he's shown up as like a wingman to say like, hey, I was there too at one point, and I wasn't as sure of myself, you know, but now I got you. I got your back. Yeah.
No, that's one of my. I'm glad that you felt that, because that's one of my favorite things about working with him is it's not a deity that is here to teach you because they just know how to guide you through that lesson just by like wisdom alone. It's a deity that is teaching you these things because he's also not had it very easy. I mean, he had Hera absolutely on his back for several years, and it was even before he was born. I mean, this woman was just like,
well, he was torn apart.
oh
you know,
yeah,
so.
I mean, just like, you know, she was definitely persistent, but I mean, it goes even further because there was a period of time in his youth where after all of this, he had to go through, you know, he was born and then he was reborn and then now he's here. And Hera still wasn't satisfied and was just like, I'm giving him a gift of madness. And so his insanity, or the way of like frenzy that he's very similarly themed with often, is because he experienced it himself.
Interesting.
He didn't have a safe space on Olympus, and so he ended up wandering the world in this very listlessness of just not knowing his place. And it's actually how he started brewing wine and creating wine. He was, you know, the first to create it, and he gave it to these people that he'd find across the world while he was traveling because he didn't know where to go, but he knew that he had to go somewhere. And that's kind of how his cult started, actually. I mean, his wine predates Dionysus in Greece, of course, but, you know, I think that it's kind of funny to imagine how a group of wine enthusiasts went from just drinking wine and having a good time to, holy shit, this god is here to like drink with us, like we're together now, because he was very very personal with his followers, right. Unlike a lot of the other Olympians who kind of stayed up on their mountain. Dionysus didn't really have a choice because he was, to the Greeks, very insane. Like he was disconnected from Olympus.
Well, he was kind of forced into the human realm too, and you know. And I think that makes for a very interesting dialogue about how sometimes, you know, in that epistemological gap, you hear me talk about the epistemological gap a lot of times, and all of the entities and energies and gods and deities and spirits and angels that occupy this gap. On one end, we have divinity,
right,
and then on the other end we have humans. And in some ways, it's a little heartbreaking that here's Dionysus, who was probably deeper in the epistemological gap on the divine side and was torn apart, not accepted. You know, we talk about acceptance here all the time.
All the time.
Not accepted, and then basically forced down through the epistemological gap to be closer to humans than he was to his family.
Right.
You know, and as a result, created more of a like an affinity or a familiarization with humans. And perhaps is why he presents himself to humans who are feeling not accepted, not belonging, and stuff like that.
No, exactly. And a lot of his cult became those of minority, especially women and slaves and non-citizens of Greece, because they were already burdened by societal constructs. And Dionysus and his crew basically were those that were just like, you can enjoy yourself while also feeling fulfilled. Like, this is your time to feel fulfilled by just being yourself. And so it's that kind of indulgence through to fulfillment, which I really liked. And eventually, of course, like there was a lot to be said about how historically the Greeks ended up taking control of that, hierarchy or upper class. When it came to Alexander the Great, he found out that, all of these lower class citizens were having such a great time, and he also wanted to have a good time, but he used it a bit to more of his advantage of the idea of like, well, if I'm drinking, because the idea of getting drunk, especially within the cult, was that you were invoking Dionysus. Right. So when you were drunk, you were technically possessed by him. And Alexander the Great was just like, well, if I get drunk and I do some stupid shit, and I say that I was just possessed by Dionysus during this festival, and I will just, get the green check mark and we'll be fine. And it's kind of where obviously the Romans also established more of that Bacchus, right. Like the festivals in Rome were like even more extravagant, but like in Greece initially, for the common folk, it was Dionysus was their god, because it was a way to feel more colorful and feel more alive and feel more themselves, whereas they couldn't have been that way. It's also like, again, why a lot of women were affiliated with the cult of Dionysus, because rights, fun times. It was their fun, like their way of being the most liberated. Authentic.
Yeah. Yes, it's like the first like real, I guess, liberation and exploration, because there is a lot of sexual undertones and stuff like that as well too.
For
so
sure.
It's like sexual expression, and being able to be liberated in your expression.
Yeah. So I like the idea that he's teaching you these lessons because he's experienced them, like he's taking you under his wing because he knows where you're at, because he was closeted in one story, he was just shunned in others. He's just been through the ringer for sure, and then still having almost this misguidance later, or like this misrepresentation, is sometimes a little upsetting in that way, because he is such a lively person, because he's had to be. There are some stories, of course, not to denote them, that during his years of madness, there was this one instance he was on a pirate ship and he turned all the pirates into dolphins. And that's where we got dolphins, which is why they're so aggressive. And I think also like the rest of the crew is snakes and something like that. But it was not a very pleasant punishment, to be sure. But he's not a reprimanding god. He's very much a take care of yourself. Have you been checking on yourself? Have you been drinking water? But then also like having that self-indulgence and being able to know what self-indulgence is actually beneficial for you versus what isn't. So he's a kind of that duality that I talked about before, like two sides of the same coin, where you can have all of this chaos and all of this almost nonsense, really, and then on the other side you can have a very stable, like very secure feeling to yourself, and I think that's very necessary, especially these times and these days of mental health not being very linear. So you've got this chaos sometimes in the high, and then this very deep low, and he's got both sides of you covered, which is very nice.
Excellent. Do you want to take some questions from the folks who
Sure.
are listening in?
Sure.
This is I love everything that you've covered, and it was always very fascinating. It was very fascinating to me, because when you first approached me, you're like, oh yeah, I'm using Dionysus for shadow work. I was like, okay, you need to educate me then. So Leanna is reading Dionysus, Exciter to Frenzy, by Vicky Bromshaw, and suggested that. I wasn't sure if you were familiar with that.
I'm not familiar with that. I will have that.
Some folks wanting to say that they're going to set up an altar.
Talked
about Jim Morrison talking about Dionysus. I remember that, in the there's some documentaries where Jim Morrison had talked quite a bit about Dionysus, or invoking or being possessed by Dionysus as well.
Really?
Too. Yeah.
That is one thing that I was actually talking about with a customer outside. No, I was actually it was our new coworker. We were talking about how amusing it must have been in ancient Greece to say, "No, babe, no, I didn't mean to do that. I was possessed by Dionysus." Like, you can't use that now, of course, but I did think that that was kind of hilarious. Especially there was some very, very interesting rituals that the cult would do. There was one called the Dionysian Mysteries, which was where they just got absolutely high, and that was it. They just got ridiculously high and then just sat there and said that, they were communing with Dionysus. And I was like, wow, you guys are partiers for sure. But I think it's that kind of misconception of what they were doing was devoted to him, and in this way of like reconnecting with him and being personal with him. Whereas from an outside perspective, it was all of these people just getting drunk and high all the time. So it was just like, oh, Dionysus must be this like very just extravagant god.
Well, and there's no way to disprove either.
Exactly.
There's no way to disprove that in those. I mean, so there's a lot of traditions that that involve altering your mind state in order to communicate with beyond and whatnot. And those experiences are always going to be unique to the person who experiences it, and there's no real way to perhaps transfer that knowledge or that experience to someone else. So like you said, from looking on the outside, it appears one way, but the experience that you're having on the inside could be something completely different. So I don't see any questions. Were there any other, like, if somebody wanted to perhaps start working with Dionysus or is a little bit more curious about it, what are some of your suggestions for where to start?
I would definitely say, obviously, I just had picked up a candle initially and started there as a meditation, which I kind of usually will have that kind of similar conversation with customers that come in wanting to start working with deities. Because it just seems this very large mountain to work with, right? Because you're discussing with this divine, right? Like that's so huge. Scary. Yeah, like that seems really big. So there's a lot of times where I will talk about just meditation as a very serene place to start. It's a very small step. But some people do have a hard time meditating, and I completely understand because it's hard to get into sometimes. But I did have like a list of things that I kind of do as devotions for him, to kind of start like relating to him or maybe invoking him or evoking. And then also a list of offerings in the event that you would like to start an altar for him, and would like to, give him things, whether it is for worship or is for working with him. Things that he loves as offerings involves leopard skin jasper, which I have here, patchouli, feverfew, passion flower, hibiscus, pine cones, like his thyrsus, the staff, lepidolite, epidote, benzoin, lavender, grains of paradise, tree agate, tiger's eye, purple or green candles, bread, masks like masquerade masks, or theater masks, the very traditional ones, honey, figs, cloves, ashes, furs, perfumes or colognes, Apatite, Vetiver, Wisteria, tickets, like from a play or a concert or a movie.
Oh, we have tickets from last night.
Yeah.
I have an extra one in my purse that you could use if you want to use that
Yes,
one.
I'd love to. Red meat, your own writing or your own art, pictures that bring back memories, and then vines, of course. It doesn't have to necessarily be grapevines, but anything that kind of goes up posts or fences. They're also usually invasive anyways, so if you snip one, I don't think anybody's gonna miss it. As far as devotions though, he's got quite a few that I've noticed kind of becoming more popular within my day-to-day life because of him, which is making playlists. I started out with a couple where I was just like, oh yeah, like this is my favorite playlist. I'll listen to this sometimes. And it was really like choice playlists that I would listen to from day to day. And now I've just got so many.
Oh, you're speaking my language now.
Yes, exactly.
Like the queen of playlists.
Exactly. You have to have a playlist for everything. So like that's what I do. Like when I'm feeling especially in a particular mood, like I've got one playlist for that. Like it's also playlists that help you feel. I mean, he is a very He's a patron of feelings, I think. So like definitely anything that's invoking or kind of driving these feelings for you to genuinely sit down and feel them is a great playlist for him. He thinks that that's wonderful.
We should get you and Anne together to do a playlist for the boutique that we can share on social media if people were interested in like being inspired by a playlist, like a Dionysus playlist.
Yes, I'd love that. I'd love
great.
that. He also really loves self-care baths, which is actually the night that I really realized I was working with him was in a bath where I was sitting there, I had a glass of wine, and I was like, oh my gosh. It was just that moment of realization of, oh my goodness, you're here. And, you know, his candle was actually sitting on this little stand that I had, and it flickered really high, and I was like, oh my goodness, like, okay, that's really cool. He just likes being, like, he likes to make sure that you're centered. It's not necessarily about a give and take relationship. It's a lot of giving because you are, he typically likes to find those people that give too much often. So he knows that is not, you don't have to constantly give. He's really likes to be the one that gives to you.
So in a lot of ways, the connection with wine is a lot like invoking filling your cup.
Yes. Yeah, like the Ace of Cups energy is a very, like King of Cups, Ace of Cups tends to be cards that will fly out for him quite frequently. And initially I thought, oh, like I've got a lot of Cups energy usually when I'm doing readings for myself, and I thought it was just me. Until I was really sitting down and thinking about it, and just how he shows himself in my day-to-day tends to be a reminder of your cup is empty, stop giving. And I'm like, but there's a droplet. He's like, stop it. There's nothing. It's okay that there's nothing. Know that it's okay to have nothing, but you don't have anything to give. So self-care baths is a really wonderful way to do that. Just kind of reconnecting with more of yourself, but also him. Drinking wine naturally. Wow, that's crazy. Dressing up for the hell of it. Exactly. I think that this is actually the perfect day to be doing all of this, because he's definitely, like, after working with him, I just started doing what I wanted with my wardrobe and dressing and doing makeup just whenever I wanted to. There's a lot of times where I got comments of just being like, oh, you just like never wear t-shirts or pants, like regular jeans. And I was like, no, I don't. And it's not because I want everybody to like say something about it. It's because I want to do it. Like it's nice. It makes you feel good. Again, it's a very feel good deity to be working with. Photo shoots was actually another one.
Oh wow.
I
highly recommend them.
Yes,
they're great,
wonderful.
You know, emotional booster. You know,
yeah.
There's nothing better sometimes than to. I mean, it feels a little awkward sometimes.
Yes,
you know,
it can.
But to have somebody, you know, help you look and feel your best, you know, and somebody to help encourage you along the way. You know, and say, you know, oh, these are great, or these are going to come out great. And then when you get like beautiful photo shoots back,
exactly,
it really can just like change how you see yourself.
Exactly,
you know? So.
Exactly. That's one of those things that I want to really press when you're working with him or even just worshiping him, is those instances of almost instant gratification for yourself. It's nothing else. Maybe something that you did, or maybe the fact that you were able to do that photo shoot when maybe a couple months back you weren't able to before, you didn't have the confidence necessary to do one, but like, wow, afterwards you just feel wonderful. I remember the first photo shoot that I'd ever done, I wasn't very aware of what I looked like until I had pictures taken of me and I saw them and I was like, oh, okay, I understand this now. Like, it's wonderful. It's just like a nice little sparkle to your day.
Lots of self-love.
Lots of self-love. Yes. Theater, whether acting or watching it. Gardening is actually really wonderful. Shadow work, of course. Traveling, journaling, practicing the strength of your voice. Looking in the mirror, whether it's, I like to say that it's looking in the mirror, but also saying something nice about yourself. Sometimes I have a very hard time looking at my reflection. and can get very draining sometimes, but especially when I'm thinking about doing something, just kind of devoting as like a small task to him, it's usually that, like, take a moment to look at yourself in the mirror and say something that you love about yourself and then leave. And I know that it sounds ridiculous, but it really does, like, that manifestation work of just saying an affirmation to yourself and believing it every time before you leave the bathroom. Wonderful. There's also wandering, just wandering around, practicing lines or speeches, being a little more kind with yourself every day, taking pictures of yourself because you felt good. Always recommend a selfie. Going to parties and enjoying them for yourself, going out with big groups of friends or parades or festivals. I think especially he is a god of homosexuality, which is wonderful. So if you do have a chance to go to a pride parade, do it for Dionysus because he'd love to be there.
That needs to be a pin.
Do it for Dionysus. It needs to have the rainbow behind it too. That would be perfect. I'll have to think about that actually.
We'll make that happen.
That would be awesome.
Manifest.
Yes. I also I just kind of wanted to give like a couple of things if we don't have any other questions at the moment.
Let's take a look. Not questions, a lot of affirmations, and I think a lot of people are connecting with what you're speaking about. And perhaps we will probably find that there is some new renewed energy in exploring Dionysus beyond just the surface of what a lot of people have been exposed to him as. This has been very educational. I know that we've talked quite a bit about it, and I've loved to see how he's been working through you and through your practice and through self-confidence. I see a change. I see when you are working with your full authentic self, and you are being kind to yourself and everything like that. It changes, how you radiate.
Yes, so. I think that's also why he is considered a youthful god now. Obviously, we joked about Benjamin Button, but like it makes a lot of sense to me that he is now represented as a very youthful deity. I believe that he is kind of a forever young, actually, and also still considered both masculine and feminine. And he's just. That youthfulness becomes you because that youthfulness makes more sense now when you think about all of these other things that he's endured, and to still be able to look so lively and still be able to have that bright light and still have a group of people just really excited that he walked into the room, like that's lovely. And that makes more sense now when you kind of connect those dots and look at that history. And kind of see where he's been to get to that point, which I think is kind of very reminiscent to what you'll find when you do work with him, is that you look at yourself and see how far you've came, and then now you're here, and that is that youthful glow that you've got. Or maybe you're still working on the glow, because I know that I'm still working on it. Like it's not permanent, and that's okay, but you're working towards that permanence, that like immortality that he's got.
Well, like a grapevine, grapevines don't grow in straight lines.
No, they don't.
Bend, they turn, they twist.
Yeah.
They wrap around themselves. Sometimes they're actually really kind of like ugly when you look at the root.
Yeah, especially when they've like wilted or like they've gotten dry. There's no more leaves during the winter. They're all just coiled around each other.
And they don't look like they're alive. They don't look like there's anything there. But then every spring, new leaves pop out. They're very lush. If you ever get a chance to kind of like touch and go see grape groves or whatnot, it's a very interesting energy to be around. So
there was one point actually somewhere along here I had talked about the way that rebirth was even seen through grapevines, of where you have to actually prune them. You have to prune them sharply. Like it's not a gentle snip. It's a very sharp cut to an edge. And they will lie dormant, obviously, during the winter, but you have to prune them before the winter, and then they're very stiff over that season. And then when they come back, they're more alive and they're able to grow again and bear more fruit because you've had to take away these parts. And I think that is in that viticulture, it's obviously, I think, at least for me, kind of the words taken from Dionysus. Mm-hmm. Because he's been cut off sharply. You know, he's been pruned. He very literally, unfortunately, but now, like, afterwards, you know, he'd borne all this fruit. Right. He was able to give the fruit to the masses, and I think that's lovely. But I do think that there are some similarities there that could be found in that. I also like to say that he's one that will make sure that your soil is nurturing you, because that is very important. Something that I even learned way back at a camp that I've gone to for years. If your soil is not giving you enough nutrients, of course you're not going to be able to grow. So sometimes it is your surroundings, and he's very helpful with being able to give back the nutrients to the soil, especially if it's a soil that you can't uproot yourself from, right? Not everybody has the luxury of being able to leave the environment that's making them feel smaller. He gives a lot of ability to bring back autonomy for yourself and bring back that authenticity within the environment that you're in, regardless of, you know, whether it is one that you want to stay in or not. It becomes something that you're able to be in because you're more comfortable with yourself, which is kind of where a lot of like our most powerful workings come from, is just like that deep within rather than what's from the outside, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. However, this was very beautiful. I believe that everything that you've been able to bring to our customers with your experience and, you know, your connection here helps to enrich other people's lives, enriches other people's experiences and understanding of not only themselves, but maybe it will definitely encourage their curiosity, right?
Yes, for sure.
And you absolutely enhanced our knowledge, you know, through this tenfold. So I want to thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to doing more of these kinds of Tales from the Hearth scenarios and sitting down and just being a little bit more informal and just having these kind of talks, because I think this is how people have learned, you know, in the past, you know, is from each other and through sharing of knowledge and sharing of stories and whatnot to kind of help each other grow. And I do think that there's so much to be gained from these kinds of discussions versus the wham bam done in a minute.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, because I always feel bad when we're at the counter and, you know, people are needing to go places, but we're just in the middle of a story and they're lingering just a little longer because they want to hear the rest of it. So these are those opportunities which I love that, like, have that more deep connection between, I mean, granted, we're through a screen, but it's still very connected, I think, because this environment here is very intimate, and then, like, being able to be with you, but not necessarily with you is very nice, too. So it's lovely. Is it okay if I have a parting? A very, wonderful. Just a very lasting thing. Probably a little bit more personal than all of these other stories. I had other things that were associated with him, like moments, some being the first time you smile again genuinely after a period of time in which you faked it. When the big velvet curtains open on a stage and reveal the cast hand in hand, taking a bow amidst a roaring applause, or taking the first smell of a newly opened bottle of wine, or expressing yourself authentically for the first time because you're in a space that praises doing so, and then being happy with your reflection, going to bed after maybe drinking a little too much, but instead of feeling dizzy or regretful, you feel at peace, the sound of your favorite person's laugh, lounging around when you need the break because you deserve the break, the feeling of the sun on your skin while you're going on a walk, or brushing over a silky smooth patch of fur, or wanting to document every moment because you don't want to forget it, or wishing every moment you could feel the same as when you feel your best, which is things that I associate with him. Mostly because This is a deity that was present because I'd asked questions in fitful sobs once before, often enough. And things like, why couldn't I have a break? Or what do I keep doing that I have to keep fighting over and over, even when I'm tired? Which is a very frequent question that we feel. But Dionysus is the deity that I found that answered even as far back as when I was 16, and when I thought I couldn't feel any deeper and couldn't rise either. Or in my most vulnerable moments, I'd ask to feel okay again because I felt so much and unlike myself, or that I'd been entirely broken by the trauma that I waded in like a pool around me. And time again after, when I had questions of self-worth because now I've become this far and I still had a hard time accepting that my reflection was mine, I made it here because I deserve it, but I didn't feel like it. I feel like he's present. I've had instances in which I've asked myself, how am I going to be loved after this? And there's that voice from behind me that says, what's stopping anyone from loving you as you are now? Which I feel like has always been him. And I end up sitting with my silly little pen and my silly little journal, and I dive into shadow work that I was too scared to do because of it. And he's a deity that understands pain and suppression of the self, and he listens because he's always been a faithful deity, despite his reputation elsewhere. So you learn to accept that his love is especially there because it doesn't go anywhere but where it needs to go. It's beautiful, Piper.
All right, cheers to that.
Cheers to that.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up.
Yes.
If you have questions, leave them in chat. We'll try to get to them later. We'll find
Yeah.
your questions a little bit later and come back to them. If you loved this conversation, please show Piper some hearts and some love. So it was such a good segment. I really appreciate all the work that you put into putting it together and sharing the space and sharing your experiences and everything. It was beautiful.
I love doing it. I'm so excited. I hope that I get more questions about him because honestly, I am so giddy when it happens. Please
what
do.
your next work is now is going to be nonstop Dionysus.
Good.
All day.
Good.
Not a bad thing.
Not a
Excellent.
bad thing. Not a bad thing at all.
Okay, so we are going to wrap up on this. I don't have a set schedule for when we are going to be doing these kinds of chats or anything like that. It was kind of, let's do that. Let's pick a date. And do that.
It was very impromptu, but I liked it.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to be like that.
Yeah.
Maybe at least once a month we'll get together with other members of the team and let them have a chance to kind of share their stories and tales, from the hearth.
Yeah.
I like to play on words, hearth, hearth, heart.
I do feel it. I do feel like my heart is very open right now.
All right. I appreciate you guys staying with us for this whole time. I'm going to have to get up there and go turn off the video because I don't know how to control it from here. So,
That's fair. That's fair.
But we hope to see you at the shop. Ask Piper about Dionysus. She will gladly help guide you on all of that. And if you're looking for tools, we have some new tools that you've been helping to create and bring to the shop. And so I love that he's been able to move through you to create some new corners and tools and resources for the community.
Yes, and if you happen to need kind of an example as far as altars go, I do have an altar for him now at the store, which is really wonderful. So I'm excited that he's just present.
Excellent. We'll get a picture of it too, so that way some folks can kind of see it.
Yeah, of course.
Excellent. All right. Well,
I'm
thank
so
you,
excited.
Piper.
I'm
Appreciate
so excited.
it. All right, you guys.
Thank you.
You guys have a great night.